Emmerdale's Kim Tate, Claire King, is not in a good way as the festive season approaches, as she cancels Christmas dinner because she doesn't feel like she can trust anybody anymore, which means home farm could be unusually silent and empty this year. Kim was involved in a serious accident earlier in December when her horse, Ice, ran into a snare that had been illegally placed on her land. Kim fell and needed emergency surgery to save her leg, while Ice was so badly injured he had to be put to sleep. It was Joe Tate, Ned Porteous, who made the decision about the horse, and in her grief Kim blamed him for going ahead without asking her first. She also thought that Joe was trying to take over at home farm. In light of all this, Kim made the decision to change her will and left home farm to Lydia Dingle, Karen Blick, her closest friend and the one person she thought she could trust. So she was devastated when a guilty Lydia admitted that it was Sam James Hooton who'd organized the illegal shoot with her knowledge. If it hadn't been for Sam and Lydia's actions, Kim and her horse would never have been injured. Feeling entirely alone, Kim prepares to spend Christmas by herself. Joe tries to make amends with her, but she's too angry to talk to him and sends him on his way. Unfortunately, Kim is struggling physically in the aftermath of her injury, and she has a fall in the house. She's in agony and knows she needs help to get up. She calls for help, and is very annoyed when Lydia was the one person Kim could trust, or so she told herself as she inked the change. There was a logic to the choice. Lydia laughed at the same dark jokes that Kim indulged in. She kept confidences, and she had, in the past, stood at Kim's side when the rest of the village chose rumor over reason. Kim wanted someone who would protect the farm from the clumsy hands of lawyers and Tates with designs. Then Lydia confessed. It was Sam, she had said, the words tumbling like a child's confession in a church. Sam set it up. I knew something was odd. He told me he'd sort the chute, said it was for vermin control. Kim had felt the room tilt. Sam Dingle, blustering and guilty in equal measure, had orchestrated the illegal shoot. Lydia had known, and had kept silent. The betrayal was not simply the setting of a snare, it was the breaking of a bond. Kim's anger did not flare, it calcified. She was a woman who could forgive little, and would forgive nobody for choosing convenience over her. So she canceled Christmas. She moved around home farm like a monarch reclaiming a border, methodical, cold, and unrelentingly present. Everyone else went about their preparations in the village, glittering and oblivious. The Dingles were producing extra puddings and stacking crackers. Joe had attempted a half-arsed apology that looked like a business transaction more than plea. I did what I thought was best, he said when Kim refused to speak to him. It was the wrong phrasing and she left him with it. 2 days before Christmas, with frost painting the hedgerows and the church clock at St. Mary's striking 5 in the afternoon, Kim had one of those rare miscalculations. She was trying to lift a crate of feed herself, pride, exhaustion and a need to assert that her body still obeyed her, and the world tipped. The landing beneath the kitchen fell away, and she hit the slate floor hard. Pain sliced through her like lightning. For a moment she lay, breathing, and then reality returned. She could not get up. She shouted for help because shouting was what humans do, a universal, desperate ritual. When Lydia arrived, breathless, hair escaping her braid, more worried than practical, Kim saw the expression and something inside her curdled with fury. Not because Lydia was there, because she was right. It had been Lydia in whom she had placed her trust. Get away, Kim rasped, the voice high with suppressed indignation. Lydia's face did not harden as others might have expected. There was only tremor and a purity of contrition that made Kim's anger flare anew. I'm not leaving you, Lydia said. I'm here. I'm staying. Kim wanted to refuse. She wanted to force Lydia to prove that her loyalties were not the casual allegiances of Dingle neighbors, but a thing worth sharing. But when Lydia knelt and touched Kim's arm, the solidity of that human contact, raw, imperfect, and warm, cut through the barbs like sunlight. Kim let herself be helped up. It was a small mercy. It was also, as the next week would prove, the kind of mercy that would demand a price. Christmas Eve arrived with an uneasy sky. Home farm's windows reflected a village deep in Yuletide theater. Carolers practicing under street lamps, mince pies being tart in ovens, presents wrapped with a kind of frantic optimism. Kim paced like a caged animal. She had sent Joe away with an icy wave when he tried to bring flowers and breakfast in bed. She had ordered staff not to accept visitors. But the world is a mix of intentions, and intentions do not always win. At dusk, while the village choir practiced, "O Come, All Ye Faithful" for a charity concert, Sam Dingle came to the farm. He came with mud on his boots and a contrite, broken look that always made lies look like confessions. He had come because he could not bear the weight of what he had done, because his conscience had the habit of emerging from the darker corners of his personality like an unwelcome houseguest. He wanted to speak to Kim. Lydia let him in. The meeting was a short one. Sam admitted again that he had arranged the shoot, that it was meant to be a way to control vermin, a measure that had spiraled. He muttered about being scared, about being manipulated by men who thought themselves hunters and not arsonists of other people's lives. Lydia spoke up and said she had not known the full consequences, that she had been stupid, fearful, and ultimately cowardly. The two of them looked at Kim as if they wanted absolution like a coin clutched between palms. Kim's answer was not a speech. It was a cold, brittle sentence. You have both done something unforgivable. That night, as the village lights twinkled and the church bells tolled midnight services, Home Farm slept uneasily. Kim lay awake and considered such things as legless futures, the loss of ice, and what it meant to have trust broken in a life that had been built on commands and covenants. Lydia sat by the fire, the room smelling faintly of brandy and sadness, and thought about what loyalty meant when it demanded sacrifice. The following morning was the one that would tilt the village. The storm came like an old grievance, slow to start and then sudden in its fury. Winds lashed at the hedgerows and rain came in curtains. The stream that bordered the farm, usually a placid, genteel thing, swelled with the grief of the weather. On the farm, a generator tripped and the lights failed, plunging rooms into flickering shadows. Kim was downstairs, moving slowly but with purpose, when Lydia knocked on the door of the barn. Voices carried, someone shouting, panic in the tone. Sam had gone to check a fence at the far end of the property when the wind had uprooted a tree. He had not returned. Joe, who had been watching the skies and fretting over his place in the Tate world, came back when he heard Lydia's shout. He found Lydia gagging for breath as she tried to describe where Sam had gone. A figure downstream, a tractor, a vanished footpath. The images in the minds of all present were jagged and unprepared. By the time the rescue party formed, Joe with strength and a kind of broken purpose, Lydia with tears and frantic energy, Kim with anger that now translated to action. The elements had changed the landscape. Water gushed over the banks. Sam's tracks were muddied and then erased. They searched with lanterns and wild hope. When they found him, he was clinging to a fallen tree trunk, teeth chattering, hair full of cow parsley and grit. The current had taken him, but not yet remorsed him. It was a near-miraculous save. Someone took an awful risk on the ice-crisp water and pulled Sam to flatter ground. He was alive but shivering, and the barn door had blown shut behind him like a final, small cruelty. Relief was a complex thing. Kim felt it like a chord struck in the wrong key. Gratification over Sam's survival intertwined with the furious knowledge that his reckless act had set the events of the past month into motion. The Dingles wanted a quiet hero narrative. The village had saved one of their own, the farmer had found redemption, and people would leave Home Farm smiling. But soap, like life, is greedy for complication. A few days after the rescue, when the frost had hardened into something brittle and the main feelings had been uttered, someone came to the farm with a story that did not fit the neatness of a village press release. An anonymous caller, voice electronically altered, words clipped and cruel, said they had evidence that the illegal shoot had not been an accidental misjudgment. The snare had been placed intentionally as a message. There had been a second set of footprints near the trap, and the caller implied they knew whose they were. This was a kind of poison. Rumor is a corrosive agent in a place like Emmerdale. The village, already hungry for scandal, feasted on that whisper. Names were thrown like knives across the village green. People who had been casual acquaintances with Kim in the past found reason to gather again. Those who had reasons to hurt her found an opportunity. Kim, who never did anything by halves, started her own quiet investigation. She summoned the farm manager, checked the security tapes. The cameras had a habit of dying at the most inconvenient moments, and walked the boundary of her land herself, boot prints crunching in the frost. She found the second set of prints. They were small, booted footprints, not Dingle, not Tate. They were the kind of prints a farmhand might make, a person accustomed to fields, to the rhythm of animals and machinery. The signature was one of familiarity, deliberate and watchful. "Someone's watching Home Farm," she said, the sentence like a blade being sharpened. "And they're not just watching. They're sending us a message." The anonymous threat acted like a mirror turned on the village. People who had been petty in public panicked in private. Lydia's friends asked her questions. Sam lied, a reflexive, protective response that did more to fray trust than anything else. Joe, feeling the prickle of his exclusion from power and from Kim's confidence, lurched from contrition to desperation. He started digging into his own family's ties, his mind running through scenarios as a man who'd only just learned the texture of humility. And then, on the cusp of New Year, the action that no one had expected: a barn fire at the neighboring property. It was late, a New Year's Eve full of the kind of celebration that smuggled its sorrows with the champagne. The flames leapt and licked with theatrical malice, red against the black. People ran with buckets and hoses, villagers throwing themselves against a force that did not respect apologies. In the end, there would be a casualty, a man no one had expected to lose. The man was not Kim. He was not Lydia. He was not even Sam. He was a quiet farmer named Daniel, a man who, up until that night, had seemed like background scenery in everyone else's dramas. He had been the one who, according to some, had seen things in the weeks leading up to the snare being set. He had been the kind of man who kept to himself, and thus harbored secrets large enough to topple fences. When the flames had been fought and the hoses drained, Daniel had been found under the collapsed rafters, gone before anyone could ask him to tell the story. His death was the kind that compels a village to choose sides. Some said foul play. Others whispered of tragic consequences of poor maintenance and an ill-fated spark. But where tragedy breathes, suspicion also grows teeth. Kim stood on the periphery of the devastation and felt that cold, familiar sensation that she had learned to call destiny. The village would come for her, not with pitchforks but with questions, and questions can be worse. The Dingles would tear at their loyalties, the Tates would posture, and the police would start to connect threads that may or may not be there. And yet, standing amid the charred smell as dawn came up like an accusatory eye, Kim found herself thinking of Ice, of the horse whose death had started the chain of resentments. She thought of how small actions, a terse instruction, a lie told to placate a frightened friend, the placing of a trap to control something as mundane as a fox, had rippled into consequence. She also thought, with a startling clarity, of Lydia's hand on her arm that afternoon when she had fallen. There was a loyalty in that gesture that could not be faked. The next days were a swirl of police tape and interviews, and the villagers, hungry for closure, took sides with the ease of people who prefer their world arranged into simple stories. Kim was interrogated, not because they wanted to punish her, but because she was in the center of the storm. Woman with motive and means, owner of land cut through with secrets. She gave them answers that were carefully measured, not because she feared her words, but because she understood that in the theater of law, the wrong flourish could be fatal. She avoided melodrama. She avoided grand statements. She concentrated on cold facts, dates, times, the sounds the dogs had made. It was a masterclass in nonchalance, and not one person, save Lydia, believed her to be harmless. Lydia, meanwhile, proved to be a more complex creature than many had afforded her credit for. Her guilt had not culminated in confession. It had matured into action. She spent nights at the farm, cooking meals for Kim, mending fences, doing things that spoke in action rather than promise. She spoke to the police openly, and there was something in her voice, a brittle edge of resolve, that made one think she was determined to take the blame if it meant sheltering the woman who had given her everything. It was almost, in its ridiculous honesty, noble. This was when the story turned, gently and then fiercely, into something that felt like prophecy. The anonymous caller came again with more detail, then a date. Someone planned to make another move on home farm. The village braced as if a giant was about to take one more step. Christmas had not been what anyone expected. It had been a quiet theater of grief, with Kim at its stern and Lydia at its beating heart. New Year promised more action than anyone could have planned for. And Claire, the imagined voice from a life beyond the television of their days, had been right. Emmerdale would not let them off lightly. Births and deaths often came with the same breath in this place, and dramatic storms have a way of revealing the things we prefer in shadow. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Emmerdale Echoes.